Good morning, and thank you so much for joining us on this bright London Tech Week. If we didn't already know how important building ethical tech that people want was, students protesting outside the Ministry of Education about algorithms really hammered it home about how high the stakes are for citizens, civil society, governments, and business alike. I can't say it loud enough that now is the time that businesses and government need to move from talking about ethical technology to living and breathing it. CogX has been fortunate to bring you some of the very best speakers on these topics over the years, and today is no different. We'll explore some of the most pressing issues and promising solutions for building the tech that we want. We're shining a spotlight on designing the UK's digital twin, the importance of data and seeking justice, and we'll be joined by the UK's Minister of State for Media and Data to announce the National Data Strategy. And last but very not least, we'll be joined by Taiwan's trailblazing digital minister, who'll be interviewed by Kara Swisher. Stay with us all morning, ask questions, dip in and out, but whatever you do, don't forget to share what you've learned here today. And for our first session, which I'm actually the chair of, hurrah, I really decided to focus on the National Digital Twin Programme because almost every conversation I've had since coming back from maternity leave in March, that's not obviously been about COVID, has been this mention of what a digital twin is, whether it's personal, company-wide or country-wide. And it's an exciting time to look at how we can use technology to simulate, build, test, learn, and so on. But what I had really got worried about was that the conversations often lacked the specific look into the ethical considerations around that technology. So I thought it was a good idea to get together some of the world's leading experts in this topic, and I'm excited to introduce my panel. We have Dr. Millie Zametta, who's the head of public policy at the Open Data Institute. Prior to joining the ODI this month, welcome, Millie. She was the Senior Policy Advisor at the Royal Society, before that the Alan Turing Institute, and she's also worked in medical research. She holds a degree in philosophy from Oxford, Cambridge and York. And also Dame Wendy Hall. As you all know, Dame Wendy Hall is the Regis Professor for Computer Science, Vice President International Engagement, and is the Executive Director of the Web Science Institute at the University of Southampton. She is a CogX friend, family advisor. She's the Fellow of the Royal Society and also the Royal Academy of Engineering. She's also co-wrote the UK government's AI review and is the first ever skills champion, as well as being a member of the AI Council, which I chair. And in May, she was appointed the chair of the Ada Lovelace Institute. Thirdly, we'll have Gilbert. Gilbert heads the Operational Transformation Technologies in BT, and his research is focused on applying AI technologies. He's the co-editor of 2 books on service production management and is the visiting professor at University of Essex. He's also a member of the British Computer Science Specialist Group on AI. But before we introduce all of those incredible panelists, I'm going to introduce Mark Enzer. So Mark is the CTO of Mott MacDonald, but most importantly today, he's the head of National Digital Twin Programme at the Centre for Digital Built Britain. So if we can bring Mark on, as he is going to explain to us all what a digital twin is, and what, most importantly, a national digital twin is, and how it can help us all.
Yeah, thank you very much. So the National Digital Twin is envisaged as an ecosystem of connected digital twins. But I guess what that then immediately poses the question of is what is a digital twin, just an individual one? So I guess the kind of entry level definition of that would be that it's a realistic digital representation of something real, assets, processes, or systems. But it's more than just a representation, because that could really be any old model. I think the thing that marks out a digital twin is the connection between the physical and the digital, and that connection is a data connection. So what we see in a digital twin is the model of the thing that's being modeled is fed by data from the thing that's being modeled. So it opens up all sorts of fantastic possibilities of understanding more what's going on in the physical world, but then also helping with prediction of what might happen and helping with what ifs. So you can see the benefit of individual digital twins, in pretty much every part of an asset's life cycle, in its planning or design, operation, maintenance. You can kind of see how that understanding of what goes on in the physical world helps to run it better. But where it gets even more exciting is when we start to think about connecting digital twins together. And what that connection would be is a data connection. Really what it comes down to is sharing data across organizational and sector boundaries. And making those connections is fueled by secure, resilient data sharing. But where we would get to if we followed that logic is an ecosystem of connected digital twins. So that's basically what the National Digital Twin is about. But we can see it starting maybe in one sector, transferring into other sectors, connecting sectors across. So all sorts of fantastic possibilities.
Amazing. And can you give us an example of where you think the National Digital Twin could really make a massive difference, like a use case that you could see the country running at first?
There are so many use cases, and I think that what they all boil down to is about making better decisions faster and cheaper. That's really what the promise of this is, because what it's doing is taking data from the thing that's being modeled, where we can then generate insights, and those insights can lead to better decisions, and the better decisions lead to better interventions. So I think all of the use cases that we can imagine and kind of do riffs on are to do with making these better decisions.
Right.
But they can be in pretty much any part of a life cycle. So in better planning, in better design and delivery of our assets, in better operation and maintenance of them.
So could, for example, we use it for modeling to avoid another lockdown due to coronavirus, or to reduce our carbon footprint, or what are some good kind of tangible things we could hold on to while we have this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think a really good one to grab onto would be around the net zero and driving towards that. Because I think we can see with that it quintessentially is a systemic challenge. It can't be solved in silos, and therefore we have to break the silos. The way we break silos is by sharing information across them. And with the National Digital Twin being all about this secure, resilient data sharing across boundaries, then that's the kind of thing you need to unlock cross-sector net zero decisions. Right. And so the type of thing that you might imagine is where there are strong connections between the energy sector and the water sector, or the energy sector and the transport sector, that this data sharing across those organizational boundaries would help to facilitate better system level decisions.
Got it. That makes sense. And so let's do a little deep dive into how businesses are using sort of one digital twin rather than a national digital twin. And we'll bring Gilbert on to talk to us a little bit about what he's doing at BT and how their digital twin works. Morning, Gilbert.
Morning, Savita. So within BT, we are using digital twins in our network and service operations to different levels of maturity. The most advanced is the use case we have on sustainability. So BT consumes about 1% of UK's electricity. And what we have done is build a digital twin of our network that includes about 10 million equipments within our core network. And we are using AI techniques and visualization to better understand usage of energy within our exchanges and data centers with a view of optimizing them. And what we're also looking at is running scenarios, so modeling capacity management scenarios within the network so that we can detect anomalies and proactively manage the services that we offer to our customers. And then we're also looking at how best we could migrate equipment or services from legacy systems onto newer ones, because they consume, old and legacy systems consume a lot of energy, as Mark referred to earlier on. So we are using the network data twin to help us do this. And more recently, we have been working with our partners to better understand how we could extend our network digital twin to include our underground, overground assets. So we're talking about the ducts, about the 14 million or so poles that we have, and then 90 odd million, 90 odd thousand cabinets that we have. How could we include them in the digital twin? And then lastly, around knowledge management. So we do have legacy systems within our estate, and some of our colleagues working on these have used the tools for a number of years, 30 years in some cases, and coming to retirement. The question for us is, how could we better leverage the digital twin to capture the knowledge that these engineers have, so that we could use for training and proactive maintenance going forward? So these are just a few examples that we are working on at the moment, Tabitha.
Got it. And Millie, if we can bring Millie on, and we'd love to hear, Millie, we'd love to hear a little bit more about your new role at ODI and how you and the ODI have been working in the digital twin space, and specifically the National Digital Twins.
So in 2018, before I joined the ODI, Treasury launched the Digital Framework Task Group, which is to help guide the development of the National Digital Twin. And the ODI has been contributing to that along the Commons track, which is around the support for information management. So it's important to note that at the ODI, we consider data to be infrastructure comparable to physical infrastructure, such as roads or, the electricity network. So in the context of the National Digital Twin, there are two really important implications of this. So one is that, as Mark pointed out, physical infrastructure generates data. And we think that data should be as open as possible. But another implication is that the data that's generated from that and the applications that are built from that data will affect how we interact with the physical twin. It's a kind of feedback loop. So it's worth bearing in mind both aspects of that. So we recommend two approaches. One is an iterative approach to building such an important thing as infrastructure. A top-down, one-size-fits-all approach might not be appropriate. You've got to maybe try a challenge approach, or do a small-scale project, a pilot here, and see how that goes and learn from it. The other really important thing is the importance of culture and behavior change in this. We don't think that a technological solution is always the right thing. It's how people feel about data and data sharing, the guidance around that will really make a critical difference here.
That's such a good point around the culture, and we so often forget that. And a good moment to bring in Dame Wendy Hall. Wendy, Wendy, welcome. We're clearly talking about lots of opportunities here. What I'd love to hear from you, the things that you think are the most obvious ways that we can capture the benefits of the National Digital Twin, but also if we could start to talk about some of the risks that are there.
Okay, so I like to frame this in the context of something people know all about today, which is the World Wide Web. I was very much involved at the beginning of the web and trying to persuade people to use these standards that Tim Berners-Lee had set out back in the 1990s. And it was incredibly difficult. And some of the things that I heard Gilbert saying was exactly what companies said back in the 1990s about using the World Wide Web. We've got legacy systems. We've got, and I'm not saying these issues go away, but I'm just saying, well, how did Tim deal with it, with the World Wide Web? And the thing was open standards and getting people to agree to use a common set of standards and protocols to exchange information. And then what happened was, he set it up so that anybody and everybody could create a website. And for about 15 years after, lots of people ignored that. But now you can't imagine you don't exist unless you exist on the web, effectively, as a company or a person. And by that, I include all the apps that have developed, which we all have profiles on, the social media platforms. They've all developed because of the web. Now, 30 years ago or 32 years ago, whatever it is now, since Tim put his first manifesto up, if we'd have sat and talked about, and you're going to hate me for saying this, Tabitha, if we'd have sat and talked about ethics, if we'd have sat and talked about ethics, we wouldn't have had a World Wide Web. And it's that balance between getting on and building things and being cognizant all the time about the opportunities and threats of what you're doing. And with the World Wide Web, we weren't cognizant of the threats. I think we'd all put our hands up and say, we didn't see what was going to happen. We saw the opportunities and we didn't. So I'm not arguing that we shouldn't think about the threats and the ethical issue. And that has to be set in the context that you and I are very familiar with, which is the world of AI, because this is all about the digital twin projects will be about the application of AI to data, huge amounts of data coming from many, many different sources, including personal data. So we do need to be cognizant. I do think we have to start building. And the key thing, because otherwise, if you remember that, I don't know how many you remember back 30 years ago, the first time you built a website, people copied what other people had done. And we need to get some pilot projects going. There are some already. There are very good examples of digital twins. We have to, so the priorities are working out what the technical standards and protocols are, the open technical standards and protocols that we will agree to sign up to, so that anybody can have a go at building a digital twin. And the thing that I think is missing hugely from conversation, we tend to talk about, yes, the infrastructure for the company, for the country, and in some sense, the governments are the major stakeholders there. The companies that have a lot of data, the retail, transport, energy, all those companies that are going to have a lot of data that are going to be so important to this, but also local councils. And that's my last point. There's lots more to make, but the key thing is that, and this is what I think where we're going wrong with the pandemic today, I really do, that it's all too central. We're not decentralizing enough. And we don't learn that lesson again. And anyone from government or anyone who's anywhere near cabinet office, if we don't learn the lesson again to build this in a decentralized way as an ecosystem of ecosystems, then it will fail, and it will waste a lot of time and money, and we will fail miserably. And we've seen that with attempts to create the digital health service. We see it in the what's happening with the testing for COVID and the contact and tracing app, and my worry is that what's happening is people will take this idea and say, right, we'll give a big contract to one company and they can build it for us. That won't work. People have to take ownership for their own data in this. It can't all be absorbed into a central government office in Whitehall.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to you on that. I think it's a really good topic for us to discuss. The thing that you said, halfway through around the World Wide Web might not exist if we thought about ethics. I wonder if a better World Wide Web with less of the challenges we have today might exist, and maybe it might have taken a few longer years.
That's the sort of thing that I challenge my PhD students with, because it's that balance between getting on and building. Right, I'm at heart an engineer. Right, you may not think of me like that, but we do. I like to build things, and but also I understand hugely that you need to, because we've learned the lesson from the web of what's gone wrong, because we didn't worry about whose data was it and who was going to make money out of it and how were they going to do that, and the security stuff that we at the beginning it wasn't there.
But I think the point is that
it all has to be part of the design.
I think the point is that we've learned from the fact that potentially might not have been the best, best sort of move fast and break things approach, and that actually this time round, whether it's AI, natural digital twin, like we can build ethics in from the get-go. And Mark, that's something that you're doing, isn't it, with the Gemini Principles, which have been described as the conscience of the national digital twin. Could you talk to us a little bit about these principles, and then we will dig into them and get our panelists' view. Let's keep up the slide while Mark's talking to some of them, just so people can see.
Yeah, thanks very much. So I think that the kind of the birth of the National Digital Twin was really in a report that came from the National Infrastructure Commission a couple of years back, which was called Data for the Public Good, and I think the kind of the clues in the title of that report, and that has driven the idea of the National Digital Twin right from the very start. So I think with that kind of guiding light of trying to use data for the public good, it seemed very sensible right at the beginning of the program to set out the values that we thought should guide us on this journey, and not to write them down as a kind of a tablets of stone kind of thing, but just to offer them up for conversation. And so I think, Tabitha, that having this conversation is absolutely ideal, because then we can make the values better that can guide us better. But we called those values the Gemini Principles. We published this document a couple of years back. I'd commend it to people to go and have a look and then engage with us, because we want these principles, these values, to be of genuine use to us. And that they're under these three headings of purpose, trust, and function. And I think many of the speakers have already, in one way or another, touched on these. And I think in some ways that purpose one is most important, in that if we don't have a purpose, if we just develop digital twins or the national digital twin because we can, or because it's fun, or because the tech is available, then it won't do what it's meant to do. So it needs to be driven by that purpose. And then you can see within there the ideas of both public good and value creation. And you can kind of maybe see a bit of a tension there. What we haven't done with the Gemini Principles is indicate what the balance point is between the implicit tensions. We just said it's really important that it should be for the public good, and it's also really important that it should create value. So let's have the conversation about where we want the balance point to be. Another similar example of a potential tension is between security and openness. And again, we're not saying what the balance point should be. We're just saying it must be secure, and also it should be as open as possible. So let's have the conversation about where we want that balance point to sit. And so that's kind of what these principles are. They are not intended to be kind of rigid laws. They're intended to be wrestled with and discussed and developed. But I think each one of those, if we kind of opened up each one of those doors, behind it, there's a really interesting conversation to be had.
Yeah, and just before we wrestle with them and open up the doors, tell me, the one about public good. Who decides whether something is of public good? Is this a dialogue with the public, or is this a set of criteria? How does that door? What does it look like behind that door?
It's a great question. And I think that's kind of for us to answer. I feel that public good should be defined by the public, but there needs to be a conversation in order to get to that point. It is an ethical matter. It's a political matter with a small p. It's something that should be the result of conversation, and it probably isn't one single answer either. There's probably multiple answers. But just by having the conversation, we're more likely to get to a place of driving towards something that is public good. If we ignore it, if we don't have it as a guiding principle or a guiding value, then we're pretty sure we won't hit that public good.
Yeah.
If I could just very briefly say on this, that I think that there are competing philosophies for how data should be used. You can see data being used for public control. And you can see at the other end of the extreme, data being used for public exploitation and just kind of making a lot of money out of people. And those are kind of not what we're aiming for. What we're aiming for is data being used for public good. Because when it comes down to it is public data. This is data about our assets and processes and systems in our built environment. So it should be public data used for public good. And I therefore think it's up to us to help define what we mean by public good.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Wendy doesn't agree, but I want to come quickly first to Millie and just and ask a little bit. Millie, you spoke about culture, and I think Mark clearly indicated that this is a cultural decision for business, the government to make. How does the ODI see this coming out as the tension, or as Mark describes it, the wrestle between those different principles?
Yeah, so it's a really important point that you both raised. So I think that as Mark pointed out, that we can quickly see that there might be tension between some of the principles, but that's just ethics. I mean, that's not specific to the National Digital Twin Programme. That's just the nature of ethics, right? And there's a wonderful idea in Aristotle. Aristotle thought that there's no such thing as progress in ethics, because solutions just create new problems, right? But the value is in the struggle. The value is in trying to address these as a community, not just with good intentions, but also with skill, So being able to discuss this with intelligence, with analysis, and with consideration of the impacts is the essence of ethics. And it would be quite sort of naive to think it will ever be resolved, but it's the commitment to engaging with it in that kind of iterative, collective way that we can have hope for resilience. So yes, of course, the potential tensions between, say, public good and commercial value, also the one about value. I mean, there's different definitions of value and how is that value distributed and so on. I think from the ODI's perspective, we would say that good data infrastructure will unlock all of this, actually, because with good data infrastructure, you can innovate, business will benefit, public service will benefit. There's a kind of knock-on effects across what we're trying to achieve here. But again, you get good data infrastructure with our attitudes around data, with our understanding and confidence in data sharing, with appropriate guidance and standards. So that's the way forward that we think.
Yeah, that makes sense. I definitely liked your quote. We were losing you a little bit there, but your quote around, solutions create more problems, and we've just got to engage with this. Wendy, what was your thoughts around what Mark was raising? I saw your head nodding and shaking at different points.
I agree, of course, a lot with what Mark says, absolutely, but this is all more nuanced. I mean, we're living through it at the moment with COVID. What's the public good? And I'm not arguing that this government's getting it right, but I would not want to be this government at the moment and having to make the decisions they've got to make between the balance between, health and safety, keeping people safe and keeping the economy going and stopping people falling into poverty. It's so difficult. What is the public good? And in all this, the controversy about what they announced yesterday is that actually it is up to us as well. And while we talk about ethics, I like to bring morals into the equation, because it isn't all about what government does. It's about how we behave. And, we all have, I think, a moral, incentive, imperative to behave well in the COVID crisis, right? That we all have to play our part. And this will be true in things like net zero as well. I mean, I was taught to turn the light switches off, right, in the house, because we couldn't afford electricity when I was a kid, right? And now you walk, but it's up to us as well. And it's this balance between what government does and what government regulates and what we as individuals do as part of that. And then the other thing I was sort of disagreeing with Mark on is that a lot of the data in a national digital twin project will be confidential to companies. You can't expect companies to make all their data open. They can't do that. And so as much of it as possible should be open, but there will be clearly there's a lot of personal data that's going to go in if you're talking about the health infrastructure, which would be part of and there's also a lot of company commercially confidential data and a lot of national security data that could be involved in this. We mustn't forget that element either. So I think the protocols and standards have got to be open about how you piece all this together. We've got to have ontologies and data sharing technologies, and I totally agree. Data is infrastructure. That's what we've got to think of it. But we've got to be cognizant that there's going to be a lot of confidential stuff in it. It's got to be highly secure, whatever we build. Just think also about how the electricity grid came about. I've been trying to read up a bit about this in terms of, initially electricity was for the people that the power station reached, and it was the engineers that made it. You could share this stuff over a grid, and then the government had to regulate, and the businesses had to grow, and it's that sort of balance. And I just want to say one other thing, because we're edging with what Mark said towards the other cultures, as in the East and the West.
I think, should we come back to that? Because I really want to dig into that, other cultures. I think that's going to be my next question to you. But just before we move on, I want to ask Gilbert specifically around what you raised in terms of companies owning the data. So Gilbert, how do you see?
I didn't say that, Tabitha. I said some of
companies owning their own data.
Yes.
That's what I mean. So Gilbert and I were talking about how can BT and other companies get involved in the National Digital Twin, but while still retaining their IP, or still retaining the value that the company has, as well as individuals' data. So Gilbert, I'd just love your thoughts on that, and then maybe we'll come to Mark quickly, Millie, and then we'll talk about the international in a moment.
Yeah, I fully agree with what Wendy said and the point you raised there, Tabitha, because at the end of the day, data is viewed as precious commodities by companies, and a model of the data twin, it's knowledge of the company that organizations use as competitive advantage. So the question is, how do we make sure that they share this willingly? Okay, we need to look at ways, maybe newer business models to help us facilitate this. And then related to this, it's the National Data Twin is making data accessible or available to people. Okay, but the question around assessing it in terms of the digital device still needs to be addressed. So we talked about when they flagged COVID. If you look at within the education sector, those institutions who were able to provide better experience to their students weren't in the deprived areas. Okay, so how do we make sure that making the data available or the models available doesn't necessarily solve the digital divide issue? And of course, you have the whole security challenges as well with IoT and devices, sensors, and so on. I mean, that poses a greater risk, and that we need to tackle.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Millie, how do you see the ownership of and the challenge around open data, companies, individuals? How do you see this playing out over the course of the next few years?
Well, I think that unfortunately, because of things like the pandemic, we're on a steep learning curve, and I think that's going to have significant implications for how society understands the potential uses of data. And I hope that those that attitude shift can be used for the public good. Now that we understand more the value of data in public service delivery as well as in innovation. But I think it's important that it's co-owned. It's not something that any one kind of community will own. So it's not something that, as you said before, the government will do by itself, or the business can do by itself, or that local communities will do by themselves. It's got to be a collective effort. And that's also what will make it sustainable and resilient. Just to come back to Gilbert, your point about the kind of digital divide and potential inequalities, I think that's a potential ongoing risk for a national digital twin. So with a federated structure, there's always the potential that some aspects of the structure will evolve at different rates than others. So how do you manage that so that it's equitable and the benefits of the framework are distributed? Is that it's not just the kind of the models that should be open, but also the insights that are derived from the analysis, as well as the data itself. And that will allow many more communities to benefit from the existence of this infrastructure. So again, that's one way in which we think the approach to this will have radical implications for the good that it can deliver.
That's a very good point, Millie. Oh dear, I think we've lost her. But Mark, I was hoping that maybe you could answer Millie's question about how you're seeing. Oh, you've come back. Thank you. We didn't lose any of your audio, so don't worry. Your question was great, and I was just throwing it to Mark and asking how you would answer Millie's question and how you're going about that in terms of building the National Digital Twin.
Yeah, one point I think on that, which would be important to make, is the distinction between making the data shareable and actually sharing it. And so what I think is a good analogy in this is the analogy of language, because at one kind of high level, we can think about these digital twins talking to each other. And the common language, the rule set that enables that, which Wendy referred to, that has to be held in common. But then it opens up all sorts of different possibilities for other people to do different things in their own time and connect it up. But you need those kind of that common rule set. So what that's like is being able to speak the same language, because if we can speak the same language, then we can communicate. But it's another matter whether we actually choose to talk to each other. Just the fact that we speak the same language reduces the friction in communication. but whether we talk to each other is another matter. And it's exactly the same thing with these connected digital twins. By having this common rule set, it means that the digital twins can talk to each other.
Yep.
We choose to let them talk, and the kind of the security implications, and whether we want it to go through a data trust or whether there's a commercial transaction, all of that is another level above. Because underneath it, it needs to be underpinned by making the data shareable.
Right.
And that means having these common rules.
And Wendy, how I like Mark's analogy of it being different languages, and obviously different countries speak different languages and have different cultural norms. How are we going to manage the fact that different countries are going to see the ethical implications of a national digital twin differently?
Yeah, and of course the word languages is overloaded a bit here because we've got the technical languages and then the cultural languages. But I think that where we're going with this one is that Mark used the terms controlling governments and cultures that exploit, and this is partly because all this, the Silicon Valley companies that we use abuse our data and use us to make money, and and we don't have in Europe we have really no way of controlling them, and then in China, of course, from the get-go they've used the technology to. People talk about control and surveillance, and they do, but they would also argue that they use it to protect. And there's about this part of this balance of how much does the government need to look after the citizen, I put that in quotes, and how much do we all just use our own free will to do what the hell we like, the sort of California model I used to talk about, and just see what happens, which is largely what's happening in America at the moment with COVID. And it's more nuanced because we in Europe have very much a data protection view. We have very much led in Europe. And UK has supported this, the whole GDPR legislation, to put data protection for the individual first, which puts us at a bit of a disadvantage in terms of some of the innovation. And I'm not saying so. It's laudable. It's incredible. It's a principle that is incredibly laudable. But we have to balance it between when do we let people do their own thing and when do we say this is what you've got to do. And by people, I'm also mean companies as well, and local governments. That's the balance as I see going forward in all of this. How do we make that balance work for the good of all of us? Yeah. And we have to keep the dialogue going with the different cultures. I think as an island we can do a national digital twin project. That's why I'm quite excited about it.
Yeah, me too.
And are looking to do it in ways that big, huge countries will find much more difficult. Yeah, and then we can spread the goodness, maybe.
Yeah, that I think would be a good thing. And there's been a question from the audience, which is around asking whether we can talk a little bit more about how we could use the national digital twin and digital twins in companies like BT for the net zero goal. Gilbert, how has BT been looking at being able to use your national digital twin to help the overall country's net zero goals?
Yeah, Tobias. So we own one of the largest fleets in the country, about 29,000 vehicles in our fleet, and we are working on transitioning them to electric vehicles. Okay, once that is done, of course, we need to work out a way that these electric vehicles, will be able to discharge electricity back into the grid. Okay, there is a concept of virtual power plants at the moment where you have aggregators who then sell back into the grid. And we believe that if you look at organizations that have fleets such as ours, or even in smaller on smaller scales, would be able to come together and push something back into the grid to help hit net zero ambitions. Yeah,
it's really interesting to see that. And Mark, how do you see your process working with what Gilbert's doing?
Well, what I really like about that response is because you can see the value of digital twins being used within a company context and that should be very much encouraged. And so, for example, you can see digital twins of individual assets being used to optimize operation and minimize energy use, and that's good, and that helps drive towards net zero.
Right.
But then there's also this point about the cross-company and cross-sector information sharing that enables more systemic decisions to be made. So you can kind of see digital twins being useful as individual digital twins, but also as federated digital twins. And we're probably all familiar with just how interconnected things are. And in fact, I think that amongst other things that COVID has taught us is just how much of a system we live in, a system of systems. Everything is connected to everything else. And therefore, if we have a hope of getting towards net zero, we have to recognize that system and apply tools to the system that are competent for solving system level issues like net zero. And so, just as a small example, if you look at the connection between energy mix and water resources, which you think, well, those are separate, they're run by separate people in separate companies doing separate things. But actually, it's really heavily connected, because quite a lot of water resource is used for cooling in energy generation, but then an awful lot of energy is used in wastewater treatment. They're connected. But that connection is going to get more interesting, because you see things like in dry years, we might need to use desalination, which uses an awful lot of energy. But then also we might move towards a hydrogen economy, which needs water in order to generate hydrogen. So it's like, it's all connected. And how on earth can you start to make these kind of complex trade-offs from one sector to another unless you have a competent approach to sharing information across those sector boundaries? And that is kind of where this federation idea, getting the interoperability, getting the connection between digital twins, where it really can come into its own.
Right. It's really helpful. There's a slightly different approach. There's a question here, I think for you, Millie. Well, definitely, I'm going to ask you to comment on it first, but it links to the question I had around how do we define public data for public good. And the audience member has asked whether we could use a citizens' assembly approach in a similar way to the ODI has done for data trusts. And I'm just wondering whether you're looking at a citizens' assembly approach, and whether and how that works, and whether you think this would be a good idea.
Well, I think just one thing I'd like to clarify about the area as a whole is we advise against the notion of ownership in relation to data. So again, back to Mark's point about the language, we prefer to talk about stewardship, which is the work that we've been doing around data trusts. So we think that we've got to take an approach that's around, say, rights and responsibilities, rather than data assets and controlling those assets. So that will underpin anything that we do in this space.
Can I ask Millie? So I know companies are talking about how they value data on their books, right, as an asset. Mm-hmm. How does that match with your view there? I mean,
but it's not either or. I think for a company's operating model, it might think about its data assets in terms of the value that it might generate for its business, and that's also in terms of its kind of responsibilities around that data, say data protection and so on. But that's also consistent with infrastructure, for example, and that's how we're viewing the national digital twin. So it can be both an asset in a kind of organizational term, but also something that an organization stewards in the context of, a national infrastructure.
I think that's great. This is a really important thing to discuss, I think, because we can't. There's something coming out of Europe next year where they're talking about companies donating data for the public good, and a sort of corporate social responsibility around data that we must watch with interest, which plays into what Millie said.
Thank you both. We've got one minute left, and I just want to come to you, Mark, and ask two things that you can share with the audience. So there's a question here: where can people look if they want to dig deeper and find out more about different use cases around digital twins? And then secondly, how can they get involved? Are you going to do a citizens' assembly? How can our audience get involved in this?
Yeah, we'd be really keen for people to get involved in this. So a direct way to get involved is through the DT Hub. This is the Digital Twin Hub, which we've set up to really bring together people who care about digital twins, those who are developing digital twins, those who have products and services to offer into digital twins. So it's a rapidly growing community. The DT Hub already has 630 members. So that would be a really good place to go. And then when it comes to engaging more broadly, then I think it is partnerships with organisations like the ODI that really bring value to the programme. And so Millie mentioned earlier on the Digital Framework Task Group, whose purpose is to bring together government and academia and industry so that we can pull together in the same direction. I think this is the kind of thing that we would want to explore. And maybe for me to follow up directly with Millie.
I'd love that. And we're going to have one final word from Millie. Fine, 30 seconds.
Yeah, so I've seen a questions come in from Tom. Could the panel dig deeper into a couple of examples? Oh, no, sorry, that's a previous one. Are there any unique ethical challenges presented by the National Digital Twin Programme, or does it just magnify the challenges typical for any data-intensive system? I'd say, but it also magnifies the opportunities, right? It magnifies the benefit and the value. That's why we do this, and that's what we should focus on.
Yes, Millie, I love it. Thank you all so much. That's exactly where we should end this. I will see you all soon. And just a big round of applause. The whole audience is round of applauding. You just can't see them. See you all soon. Thank you. Bye-bye. Gosh, that was a really awesome session. So next, we are going to introduce the Minister. So we have the Minister for Digital and Media, John Whittingdale, up next. He will be talking to us about the National Data Strategy. I look forward to being part of this conversation because, as you'll see at the end, the Minister asked us all to get involved in the consultation. So I will hand over to our pre-recorded Minister, and I'll see you all afterwards. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome to what will be one of the most important events to take place during London Tech Week this year. I wanted to be part of today's event as the theme, an ethical approach to innovation, is such a crucial issue, one that the UK has to get right if we are going to unlock the full value of data. Firstly, I want to thank the host, CogX, for organising this event, and to all the speakers who have and will contribute to this important discussion. We have already heard about the potential of digital twins and the ethical implications of these digital mirrors, and we will also hear about how we can harness data to tackle bias and exclusion, how data can be used to hold a mirror up to society. It is clear that we need to ensure that data and data-driven technology are a force for good. This is something that this government has been thinking very carefully about over the last few months. COVID has illustrated just how important data is, and we need to ensure that responsible, secure and ethical data use is seen as an opportunity to be embraced rather than a threat against which to be guarded. Let me give you one example to illustrate the power of data. In the early response to the pandemic, there was an urgent need for clinical trials to be faster and more efficient whilst remaining ethical. The recovery trial was set up in a matter of days to meet this urgent need. Patient data made available through electronic health records played a crucial role in identifying and enabling individuals from across the UK to take part in this trial. 12,000 patients from 176 NHS hospitals were enrolled. Within 100 days, the trial identified the world's first coronavirus treatment proven to save lives, dexamethasone. This was adopted in the UK on the 6th of June. And this is not a standalone case either. The fact that the government, businesses and organisations were able to share vital information quickly, efficiently, ethically and securely during the pandemic allowed us to function, to work from home, to educate our children, to shop for groceries and to connect with loved ones during an unprecedented global crisis. The pandemic has shown us just how much we can achieve with data. It's shown us the art of the possible. This government wants to make the most of this moment, and earlier this morning, the Digital Secretary announced that the DCMS has published a new national data strategy, an ambitious pro-growth and pro-innovation declaration of intent for the use of data in the UK. A strategy that seeks to maintain the high watermark set during the coronavirus and build on the lessons we learnt during this crisis. A strategy that will meet the challenges of rapid technological change across our society and economy and equip us with the tools to unlock the enormous promise of better data use. And most importantly, a strategy underpinned by the idea that everyone benefits when data is used responsibly, and that withholding data can negatively impact society. This work begins by making an in-depth assessment of what enables and prevents us from making the best use of data in the UK. We are already a leading digital nation, but there is much room for improvement with respect to data. We have identified 4 core pillars of better data use that we must address. Firstly, we need to get the basic foundations of data use right. We need data to be collected and stored in standardized ways that can work across modern, future-proof systems, and for that data to be of sufficient quality. Secondly, we also need the right mix of skills to make this happen, from the foundational capability to work with data throughout the entire workforce, through to engineers and analysts with specialist technical expertise. We must support the development of these skills both early and later in life. Thirdly, it means very little to have good quality data if it cannot be accessed appropriately. We need to do more to make data available through better coordination and sharing across the public, private and third sectors, as well as internationally. Finally, as we drive innovation and research, we need data use to be responsible and underpinned by trust. That means collecting, storing, using and deleting it in a way that is lawful, secure, fair, ethical, sustainable and accountable. The UK already has a head start in living these principles through its well-respected data regime and government initiatives like the Data Ethics Framework. The pillars that we have identified are key to unlocking the power of data for the UK. But to rise to this challenge, we have identified 5 missions that we must prioritise now. To unlock the value of data across the economy, we must set the right conditions to make it usable, accessible and available, while protecting citizens and businesses appropriately. Our first mission will be to develop a clear policy framework that will tell us what government interventions are needed to make this happen. Secondly, we will build a data regime that drives growth for businesses of all sizes, supports vibrant competition and innovation, and builds trust through high data protection standards that avoid unnecessary barriers to data use. Next, we need the benefits of better data use to be felt throughout our public services. We will drive major improvements across government by developing common data standards and interoperable infrastructure, building world-class skills and leadership, and increasing understanding of the benefits of data. With data now a critical part of modern life, our fourth mission is to ensure that the infrastructure underpinning it is safe, secure, and resilient. The infrastructure that data relies on is a vital national asset, one that supports our economy, delivers public services, and drives growth, and we need to protect it appropriately from established, new, and emerging risks. Lastly, we must recognise and make the most of the vital role that international information flows play in driving supply chains, trade, and ultimately growth, as well as international cooperation and research, as seen over the course of the pandemic. The UK should be a global champion of data use, and we will promote best practice, both domestically and internationally, to ensure data can be used to its full potential. Taken together, these priority actions will build on UK's strengths to boost the better use of data across businesses, government, civil society and individuals, driving growth and productivity, improving our society and public services, and positioning the UK as a leader of the next wave of data-driven innovation. We have an obligation to meet this ambition, and government cannot do it alone. Better data use is an interdisciplinary cross-sector endeavour. As we move to the nuts and bolts of making the strategy come to life, we will dovetail our efforts with other government initiatives, such as those on smart data and open data, and with the development of the digital strategy. But while this document is a framework for the action this government will take on data, a truly national data strategy will require activity, focus, and engagement beyond government, and we need to work together across society and the economy to make it a reality. It is not the final answer, but part of a conversation about the way we support the use of data in the UK, and I urge everyone with an interest to engage with us as we consult on this vision and begin to implement it. Following this consultation, we will bring forward proposals early next year outlining the next steps. Looking ahead, it is important that UK businesses that receive personal data from organisations in the EU take steps to prepare for new rules around data protection. But in general, it's time for a mindset shift about the way we talk and think about data. From something companies and businesses are worried to use to something we have to justify not using. Because data not only helps us innovate more and grow our economy, it improves and saves lives. And we all have an obligation to make the most out of using it. Thank you, and have a great London Tech Week.
And I'm looking forward to being part of that conversation too. Thank you very much, Minister. I hope you all watching get involved in the consultation as well. Follow the handle DCMS, the Twitter Digital Culture, Media and Sport department, to get instructions of how to do that. Next up, we have a session about Black Data Lives Matter. So I will see you in about 2, 3 or 4 minutes, and I will open up to our chair over there. So just 1 second, don't go away, and I'll see you in a minute. Thank you very much.
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.